The first snow came heavier than expected. By the time the morning sun should have risen over the hills of St. Anselm, a dense grey blanket had already swallowed the sky. The blizzard rolled in with the kind of silence that presses against your ears, like being underwater. Streets disappeared under white, fences vanished, and the world became one indistinct, shifting ghost of itself. The townspeople stayed indoors, their windows fogged, their doors bolted. Inside the Macready house, little Sarah sat by the hearth, humming to herself and staring into the flames. "Sarah," her mother called from the kitchen. No answer. "Sarah Ann, could you bring me the kettle?" Silence. The girl stood, walked slowly into the kitchen, and looked at her mother, not blankly, not angrily, just without recognition. Her head tilted slightly as if the name had never belonged to her. "Sarah?" her mother repeated, voice rising. "What's gotten into you?" The girl blinked. A beat passed, two, and then she turned and walked back to the fire. It was the first instance. At the time it was dismissed as odd behavior, a child lost in thought, perhaps under the weather. But within hours other mothers and fathers began to notice the same. Children who turned away when their names were called, children who didn't flinch when scolded, who didn't laugh when tickled, who simply stared as if the world had shifted and left them behind. And it had only just begun. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this one. Every detail counts, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Sheriff Elias Darnell was already halfway through his morning routine when he got the first call. The line crackled. Maureen Blake, near hysterical, saying something about her son ignoring her, acting like a stranger in his own home. Elias sighed and scratched the edge of his jaw where stubble always grew faster in winter. He'd been sheriff in St. Anselm for 23 years, long enough to know panic came easy when the snow isolated them. Still, he took down her address and said he'd stop by. The town had one road, lined with shuttered shops and a gas pump that hadn't worked since August. A church at the end, whitewashed and modest. A schoolhouse behind it, one teacher, 24 students. Every inch of the town now coated in fine powder, softening its edges, muting its sounds. Elias drove slow, tires crunching over fresh snow, his breath fogging up the windshield. Inside the Blake home, the boy, Tommy, sat on a stool near the window, hands folded, watching the storm. Maureen waved a hand in front of his face. "Watch this, Tommy," she called sharply. Nothing. "Tommy Eugene Blake, answer me." Still nothing. The boy's eyes shifted toward the sheriff, not afraid, not vacant, just distant, far away from here. Elias crouched. "Hey there, son. You know who I am?" Tommy said nothing. "He hasn't spoken since yesterday," Maureen whispered. "Won't even look me in the eye. He's never done this before." Elias felt a shiver, not from the cold. "Has he been sick?" No fever, no cough, nothing. He placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "You in there, Tommy?" The boy blinked. Something flickered. Then he looked past Elias, out the window, and whispered, barely audible, "It's snowing." That was all. More reports came in. By dusk, 5 children had done the same. By midnight, that number had doubled. The snow kept falling, erasing footprints before they were finished. And somewhere beneath that hush something had begun to settle in St. Anselm, something quiet, something cold, and the children were no longer answering to their names. By the following morning, every household in St. Anselm had heard the whispers. Parents knocked on one another's doors, breath freezing in the air, voices hushed. The town's single cafe filled with bundled figures clutching coffee mugs and disbelief, muttering about sons and daughters who wouldn't speak, wouldn't blink, wouldn't turn their heads when called. Some thought it might be a prank, a game children had cooked up in secret. But the fear in their eyes betrayed that no one truly believed that. Sheriff Elias Darnell stood by the counter, listening, taking notes in a worn notebook he kept in his coat. The number had grown overnight, now 13 children affected. 13 who did not respond to their names, who looked through their parents like strangers. A chill worse than the storm crept down Elias's back. This wasn't hysteria. Something was happening. "That boy of mine," said Jeb Kinney, voice cracking. He didn't even flinch when I raised my voice, just looked at me like I wasn't there. He's never done that before. Never. Others nodded. A woman near the stove began to cry softly. Pastor Lemuel Hutch arrived wrapped in a black overcoat and scarf. A tall, stern man with deep-set eyes and a voice like thunder behind a pulpit. He listened to the talk, silent at first, then stepped forward. "This is judgment," he said. "We have turned from righteousness, and now the Lord sends us a sign." Elias sighed. "Pastor, I appreciate your faith, but we need explanations, not sermons. The Lord's explanation is already here, Sheriff. It's in their eyes." "You've seen it." Elias didn't answer, because he had. Outside, the wind howled like it was mourning something already dead. Snow piled at doorways, windows frosted to opacity. The storm showed no sign of relenting. Trains had stopped running. The nearest road was buried. St. Anselm might as well have been on the moon. If you're drawn into this mystery, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now. What's happening in St. Anselm is just beginning to unfold, and you won't want to miss what lies beneath the snow. That afternoon, Elias made house calls, trying to remain calm as the patterns formed. The children didn't just ignore their names, they didn't seem to know them. He asked them directly, "What's your name? Who are you? Where's your mother?" The answers were either silence or words that didn't make sense. One boy whispered, "I used to be someone else." Another girl murmured, "There are no names in the white." By evening, Elias returned to the station and sat in his office, coat still on, staring at the fire that barely warmed the room. His fingers trembled slightly as he wrote. The notebook now held 15 entries, and the number was climbing. At dusk, the phone rang. It was Ruth Heller, the new nurse who had moved to town just 3 weeks prior. Her voice was sharp, confident, but laced with unease. "I've been keeping notes on what the parents are reporting," she said. "Symptoms are consistent, sudden onset, no fever. No physical trauma, only behavioral, psychological, but it's too coordinated to be coincidence." Elias exhaled through his nose. "You think it's contagious?" "Not in a way I understand. It's not medical, Sheriff. It's something else." He rubbed his temples. "Keep watching. Let me know if anything changes." "Something already has," Ruth said. "One of the children drew something. A pattern I've never seen before, almost like a symbol, and it wasn't just scribbling, it looked deliberate." Elias wrote that down too. The fire popped behind him, echoing like a shot. The storm roared louder that night, rattling rooftops and groaning through trees. Somewhere deep in that white silence, St. Anselm was beginning to unravel, and Elias Darnell knew they were running out of time to understand why. The schoolhouse bells rang half-heartedly that morning, muffled by snow and silence. Miss Clara Dobson, 24 and determined not to abandon routine, stood in front of her thinning classroom, 10 desks occupied, 12 empty. Those who came sat still, unspeaking, unmoved. When she called their names, they did not flinch. Not one raised a hand, not even a blink. She tried again, louder. "James, Lila, Marcus." Blank stares. She lowered her attendance book slowly. Her hands trembled as she realized something far worse than absence. The children were present, but not there. Sheriff Elias arrived mid-morning. Clara stood outside, breath visible in puffs, boots sunk into the snow. Her face was pale. "I don't think they remember who they are," she said. "And it's spreading." Inside, the classroom was heavy with stillness. Elias walked between desks. Some children looked up. Others stared at nothing. None responded when he said their names. He knelt beside a boy with freckles and a red cap. "You know your name, son?" The boy tilted his head slightly. Then, as if trying to reach something distant, said, "I had a name, but it floated away." That same phrase later would appear in multiple homes, whispered in different voices. Ruth Heller arrived that afternoon with her bag slung over her shoulder, snow melting on her coat. She watched Elias with wary eyes as they stood beside the old potbelly stove in the back of the classroom. "This isn't a sickness," she said, "but it's certainly spreading like one." Elias nodded. "I don't know what to call it." "Call it what it is," she said. "Something we don't understand." She took out a piece of paper and unfolded it slowly. "This is what I told you about." One of the children drew it on the back of his arithmetic test, a circle drawn in charcoal. Inside, a smaller circle. Between them, dozens of tiny lines, symmetrical, almost architectural. It looked like something ancient or deliberate or wrong. "I've never seen anything like it," Ruth said, and he drew it without looking at any reference. Elias stared at the image. He felt dizzy. Back at the station, Elias opened the drawer that hadn't been touched in years. Inside, a small wooden box held a bundle of papers, letters from his wife, old photographs, and the death certificate of his son, Henry. It had been 6 years, scarlet fever. The boy had been only 9. Elias stared at the certificate. He hadn't spoken his son's name aloud in a long time. Henry. He whispered it now. The room felt colder. Later that evening, he sat across from Ruth in the station's small front room, warmed only by a single kerosene heater. He poured coffee into chipped mugs. "You said something's spreading," he said. "If it's not a virus..." "It could be psychological," Ruth offered, "a mass delusion triggered by stress. The storm, the isolation, the economy. But children don't coordinate like that." "No," she said, "they don't." A long silence stretched between them. "If this mystery has you hooked, now's the time to subscribe to the channel. Every clue is another step deeper, and what's beneath this storm is far from ordinary." That night, Elias wrote down each of the children's names in his notebook. But as he stared at the list, something strange happened. He couldn't remember one of them. He looked at the name, Agnes Whitaker. He tried to recall her face, her laugh, her voice, but nothing came. Like the memory had been erased, scrubbed from his mind. He stared at the paper for minutes, then closed the notebook with trembling hands. Outside, the wind screamed through the trees like it had lost something it could never get back. The cold worsened overnight. By morning, windows had frozen shut from the inside, pipes cracked. The snow swallowed the last visible fence posts. St. Anselm fell into stillness. At noon, the Peterson boy vanished. He'd been playing in the hallway, humming to himself while his mother prepared soup. 5 minutes passed. 10. When she turned to check on him, the door stood wide open. No tracks in the snow. No sign of him. Elias led the search. Half the men in town joined him, bundled in wool and fur, voices muffled behind scarves. They fanned out toward the woods beyond the mill, lanterns swinging, boots crunching through ice. The wind howled louder than before, like it resented their presence. They found him 2 hours later, curled at the base of an old pine. His coat was gone, lips blue, fingers stiff. Ruth worked on him by the fire inside the church, where the townsfolk had gathered in growing fear. She wrapped him in blankets, rubbed his limbs, whispered his name again and again. He opened his eyes. "Elliot," Ruth said, "do you know me? Do you know your name?" The boy blinked. A long pause, then a whisper. "It was taken." He said nothing else. Sheriff Elias watched the fire flicker across the boy's frost-bitten skin. The silence pressed down on the church like a weight. Outside, more snow fell. The town's nerves began to fray. At the diner that evening, 2 men nearly came to blows, one accusing the other of bringing the devil into their homes through unclean living. A third man shouted about the need for prayer, another about the government's experiments with radio waves. Elias slammed a hand on the table and told them all to shut up. They did. But the fear didn't leave the room. Back at the station, Ruth leaned on the windowsill, watching snow drift sideways in sheets. "They're not getting sick, they're getting taken." Elias looked up. "What do you mean?" "The Peterson boy. He didn't just wander off. Something called him. Something made him go." "You're saying it's possession?" "I'm saying it's not natural." She placed a hand on the windowsill, her fingers trembling. "One of the children at the church said he saw people outside his window at night. Not shadows. People, standing in the snow." "Who?" Elias asked. "He didn't know. But he said they whispered his name, again and again, until he forgot it." Elias swallowed hard. Are the children all hearing voices? Not voices, Ruth said. Names. If this story has your heart racing, make sure to subscribe to the channel now. The deeper we go, the darker it gets, and nothing here is what it seems. Later that night, Elias returned home and sat by the fireplace, unable to shake the image of the boy in the snow. He took out the list of names again. This time 3 of them seemed unfamiliar. He read them aloud. The words felt foreign in his mouth. In his hallway, a photo hung on the wall. His son Henry, age 7, smiling on a fishing trip. Elias stared at the photo. Something tugged at him. What had his middle name been? He couldn't remember. The wind screamed louder. He shut his eyes. Somewhere across town, a child stood barefoot on a porch, eyes glassy, looking into the storm. Behind her, her father screamed her name over and over again. She didn't turn. His name was Aldous Crane, and he hadn't meant to stay in St. Anselm. A cartographer by trade, he'd been traveling through the plains, mapping rivers and trails for a federal project, before the storm trapped him. He and his daughter had been staying in a boarding house on the edge of town, waiting out the weather. She was 11, Maribel, sharp-eyed and curious, a child who carried a notebook wherever she went. Now she sat on the floor of their room, silent. She didn't answer when Aldous spoke, didn't flinch when he shouted. Maribel had always loved names, places, people, plants. She filled pages with them. But when Aldous opened her notebook that morning, every line was scratched out, not erased. Violently blotted, torn through. Only one thing remained, a circle inside another with lines extending outward in jagged patterns, just like the one Ruth had shown Elias. He brought the book to the sheriff's station that afternoon, his face pale, voice ragged. "She doesn't know me anymore," Aldous said. "She looks at me like I'm part of the wallpaper. Like I never had a name to begin with." Elias opened the notebook. More symbols, numbers, letters reversed or broken. In the center of one page, a strange phrase repeated again and again in Maribel's cramped handwriting. "When they forget you, you forget yourself." Ruth read it twice. "It's not just that they're forgetting their own names," she said. "They're erasing everyone else's too." That evening, Aldous sat with Elias near the fire, hands trembling around a mug of coffee. "She told me last week she heard someone whispering outside the window, said it sounded like her own voice calling her name. I told her it was a dream. Now I don't know." Elias nodded slowly. "You said you were mapping?" "Yes." "Trails, rivers, abandoned settlements?" "Mostly uncharted land north of here. You ever come across anything and strange?" Aldous hesitated, then reached into his satchel. He unfolded a large map, hand-drawn, with notes in the margins. A series of X's dotted the western side of the region, clustered around a valley. "This area's not on any formal registry, but I found old footpaths, ruins. One building still standing, a chapel with no steeple. Built of stone, no signs of recent use." "You marked it?" Aldous nodded. It felt wrong, like the air was heavier there. He pointed to the map. "My daughter started drawing those symbols after we passed near it." "Still with us? Then be sure to subscribe now. The map is unfolding, and what it leads to may change everything you think you know about St. Anselm." Back in her room, Maribel stared out the window. She no longer blinked at the wind. Her breath didn't fog the glass. When Ruth entered, Maribel turned her head slowly, like she had to remember the motion. "Maribel," Ruth said softly, kneeling beside her, "can you tell me what you drew?" The girl didn't speak. Her eyes fell to her lap. Then, with great care, she whispered, "They come for the words first." Ruth leaned in. "Who comes?" Maribel raised her head. "The ones with no mouths, the ones who listen when names are spoken. They don't like to be named. That's why they take ours." Ruth reached for the girl's hand. It was cold, as if she hadn't moved in hours. Outside, the wind pressed harder against the walls. And across the snow-silenced town, more children began to hum the same low tune. Tuneless, wordless, endless. It began with one parent, then 3, then more than a dozen. They all told different stories with the same bones. dreams that weren't dreams. Each described waking in the night, their body unable to move, breath caught in their chest as they stared out the window and saw a figure standing in the snow. Always the same figure, tall, impossibly thin, no face, only the outline of a head turned toward the house, and always the same sound, whispers, faint like leaves brushing together. But the whispers spoke their child's name. Over and over, soft and insistent, until the name felt strange in their own mouth. Elias recorded each account, different homes, different times, the details identical. One man, Arthur Bixby, refused to speak at all. He simply handed Elias a sheet of paper. On it the words, "They knew her name before I ever said it." The fear in St. Anselm was no longer contained. Families started keeping lanterns lit through the night, salt sprinkled at windowsills, crosses hung on every door. Elias heard rumors of prayers spoken backward, rituals passed down from immigrant grandparents. People reached into ancient places when modern sense failed them. He didn't blame them. Elias hadn't slept in 2 nights. When he finally dozed, it was shallow and jagged. He saw Henry, his boy 6 years old, standing ankle-deep in snow, calling to him. Only he wasn't saying Dad. He was saying a name Elias had never heard, again and again, as if it were Elias's name, as if it always had been. He woke drenched in sweat. At the clinic, Ruth worked through her own fatigue, cataloguing symptoms, compiling patterns. She'd filled an entire ledger and was starting a second. She read through each case again, looking for a fracture, an outlier, something to break the rhythm. Then she found it. 2 parents, different sides of town, both reported their children waking from sleep on the same night, both screaming the exact same words. "Don't name them, don't let them name you." She read the sentence 10 times. Later that day, she met Elias outside the church, snow falling slow and heavy. "I don't think the dreams are hallucinations," she said. "They're being given something. Or warned. By who? I don't know. But I think the children are hearing it too. They're not empty, they're being filled with something else. Before we dig deeper, subscribe now." These dreams might be more than nightmares, and we're just starting to uncover who or what is whispering in the dark. Ruth brought Elias to her office and opened a small tin box. Inside were drawings, dozens, made by children in the past week. Many featured the same figure, tall, faceless, standing beside houses. Some added detail, arms too long, fingers tapering into black strands. One showed the figure kneeling beside a crib, head tilted inward as if whispering. "They never spoke about it," Ruth said. "They just drew." Elias picked up the last picture. A church on fire, people running, children standing still. He felt something twist deep in his chest. He looked at Ruth. "You believe in evil, Miss Heller?" She hesitated. "I didn't. I believed in science, and medicine, and reason." She paused. "But I believe in patterns, and this one doesn't want to be understood. It wants to be obeyed." That night, the dreams returned, but this time, Elias didn't see Henry. He saw a field of snow stretching out forever. A single name echoed across it, repeated like a chant. A name he didn't recognize. He woke, gasping, and for a moment, he didn't remember his own. It started with Emily Mathers. She carved a strange mark into her bedroom wall, a circle with an X through it, jagged lines trailing from the edges like cracks in glass. Her mother found it early in the morning, scratched deep into the plaster with a butter knife. When asked what it meant, Emily only said, "So they won't say it anymore." The next day, another mark. Different house, same symbol. By week's end, 10 homes bore the same carving. Ruth photographed each one. Slight variations, but unmistakably the same shape. She showed them to Elias at the station, her fingers trembling as she laid out the photos side by side. "They don't know each other," she said. "Different ages, different families, but they're all drawing the same thing, without talking, without being told." Elias stared at the images, jaw clenched. "They're not expressing something," Ruth continued. "They're protecting something, or trying to." Elias looked up. From what? She didn't answer. That afternoon, he visited the one person in town who might know something older than science, Miriam Cray. 92 years old, blind in one eye and sharper than anyone had a right to be at that age, she lived in a cottage that leaned westward, filled with books, dried herbs, and the heavy scent of pipe smoke. People whispered about her, called her strange. She didn't mind. He showed her the photo. She nodded once. I've seen this before. Elias leaned forward. Where? Long time ago. I was a girl. My father was a trapper. We passed through a mining town, abandoned, up near the Canadian border. Town was empty, rotting, except the walls, covered in this mark. Elias frowned. What happened to that town? She shrugged. No one remembers its name. He stiffened. What do you mean? I mean it was on maps once. Had a church, school, families. Then it didn't. The name vanished. Like it was never there. He left her house with his coat tighter around his shoulders and a cold deeper than snow in his bones. Back at the station, Ruth flipped through old local records, desperate for connections. Then she found it. A yellowed newspaper from 1887, brittle at the edges, buried in the town's archive collection. The headline read, Silence falls on Powder Junction. A mining town to the north, population lost in winter. Children stopped speaking. A church burned. No survivors identified. No follow-up article. No mention in state records. The town name was never used again. If this is sending chills down your spine, it's time to subscribe. Something erased an entire town once, and now it may be happening again. Elias stared at the article. His eyes caught on a paragraph near the end. Symbols were found carved in doorways, repeated across every home. Local folklore speaks of the unnamed ones, spirits that steal identity and memory through sound. He reread the sentence aloud. The room felt colder afterward. The unnamed ones, Ruth whispered. What are we dealing with? Elias stood slowly. I think we're starting to understand why the children stopped answering. That night, Emily Mathers scratched a second mark on her wall. She didn't eat, didn't sleep. When her mother begged her to speak, Emily finally answered with 5 words. They're taking the names away. The snow let up for a single day. A brief pale sun revealed shapes long buried. Fences, rooftops, graves. Elias took it as a sign. He followed the map Aldous Crane had drawn, steering a borrowed sled northward into the woods beyond the mill, past the abandoned grain silos, and into the white unknown. The sky was flat, featureless, the air cut through every layer of wool. He rode for nearly 2 hours until the trees thinned, and the land opened into a wide, sloping valley. There, half buried beneath snowdrift and shadow, stood the remains of an old settlement. The buildings were skeletal, logs warped with age, roofs caved in, no birds, no sound but the wind. He found the chapel exactly where Aldous had marked it. Stone walls stained black by fire, its wooden door missing, hinges rusted to nothing. Inside it was colder than outside. The walls were covered in the mark, the circle and X drawn in ash, carved into stone, some small, some large, overlapping, endless. Near the altar lay a pile of stones arranged in a crude mound. At its base, a row of smaller rocks, each with a symbol carved into it. Letters, maybe, names once, now unreadable. Elias removed his gloves and brushed the snow away from the mound. Beneath the stones, he uncovered something dry and brittle. Bone, a small hand, a child's. He stepped back, heart hammering. This wasn't just a chapel. It was a grave. He made his way behind the ruin and discovered more mounds, rows of them marked only by silence and snow, a whole generation buried and unnamed. He tried to count the graves. He lost track at 30. The wind shifted. A pressure pushed against his ears. He turned sharply, nothing. But he felt it, the sense of being watched, of having trespassed. You're not alone in this story. Subscribe now, because what Elias just found may unlock the reason the children are vanishing, and why silence was never an accident. By the time he returned to town, the sky was dark again. The storm had returned. He met Ruth at the station, tracked snow across the floor, and dropped a map on the table. "There's a chapel," he said, "with graves, dozens, all unmarked." "Children?" He nodded. "And the mark, everywhere." He told her about the stones, the hand, the mound. "I think this happened before, the same way." Ruth leaned forward. "Did you see names?" "No, but I think they tried to protect them, tried to hide them, maybe even bury them to keep the names from being stolen." She opened a drawer and removed the old article from powder junction. "It's the same pattern." "It always ends in silence." Elias stared at her. "What happens if the names are all gone?" Ruth looked down. "Then maybe there's no one left to remember they ever existed." That night, as the wind screamed and snow howled past windows, a low hum began in the schoolhouse dormitory. The children were awake, standing, humming in unison, the same wordless sound. And one by one they turned toward the windows, their lips moving, breath fogging glass, whispering names no one else could hear. It began subtly. A woman forgot her husband's name while stirring soup, laughed it off, blamed the cold. A man stood in the post office staring at the sign-in sheet, unable to write his own. Then Ruth. Mid-conversation with Elias, she paused, furrowed her brow and said, "What's my last name again?" She laughed it off too, but Elias didn't. By the next day, 5 more adults reported the same, names missing like teeth from a smile, not just forgotten, but unreachable. The harder they tried to recall, the further away the word seemed to drift. Ruth called it creeping dissociation, but she didn't believe her own diagnosis. "It's moving," she said. "Whatever it is, it's not stopping at the children." At the edge of town, a farm stood abandoned, the family gone. No notes, no signs of struggle. Just an open front door and a table set for dinner. Inside the station, Elias stared at the town map, drawing a shaky red circle around St. Anselm. It wasn't containment anymore, it was convergence. The silence was closing in. The power flickered. For the first time, Elias felt something like panic. He walked to the shelf and pulled down a binder, an old log of town records, property titles, family trees. He opened it and froze. Pages were missing. Not torn, not removed, gone, as if they'd never been there. Whole families unlisted, names blacked out, blanks where lives used to be. He flipped faster, his breath shallow. One name remained, Henry Darnell, his son. But under it, the ink had begun to fade. That evening, Ruth found something even stranger. In the attic of the schoolhouse, among old books and chalkboards, she discovered a leather-bound journal. Its spine cracked, pages yellowed. It belonged to a man named Elam Reeve. Last entry dated December 3rd, 1886. "I fear we are forgotten," it read. "Our children do not speak. Our names disappear from ledgers and lips. The snow listens. The snow remembers. It will bury us so cleanly the world will not even know to mourn." She brought it to Elias, hands shaking. "This isn't just a curse," she said. "It's a pattern, a cycle." He read the page. "What stopped it last time?" She hesitated. "Nothing," she said. "If this revelation chills you, now is the time to subscribe. We are close to the heart of something ancient, and every forgotten name brings us one step nearer." Outside, the wind grew fierce again. Elias stepped into the night, the snow swirling in tight, angry spirals. He could barely see the house across the street, but he heard something. A voice, his name. Not shouted, not whispered, just spoken. Plain, familiar. He turned, heart pounding. No one there. Only snow and silence. He returned to the station and opened the notebook where he kept the children's names. 28, only 15 still legible. The rest faded like smoke. He tried to rewrite them, but his pen wouldn't move. The meeting was held in the church. 30 people crowded the pews, bundled in coats, faces pale from fear and frost. Pastor Hutch stood at the altar, hands raised, voice strained. "This is judgment," he said. "The sins of our town have risen like smoke, and the Lord has withdrawn his shield." No one interrupted him, not even Elias. Because what could he say? That names were disappearing from his records, that he'd heard his own in the wind, that the silence was now inside them? People turned on each other. Accusations muttered, then shouted. One man claimed a neighbor's child had started it. Another said the school was cursed. Someone screamed about witches, then communists. A woman wept for her daughter, still sitting upright in bed at home, eyes open, lips closed, not blinking for days. Elias tried to calm the room. No one here is the enemy, he said. But something else is. Then give it a name, someone yelled. But he couldn't, because names were the very thing they were losing, and naming it might invite it in. That night the fire started. It began in the bakery. Flames devoured the building fast, licking up the dry wood like it had been soaked in oil. Sparks carried to the tailor shop, then the grocer. 3 buildings burned. By dawn, 5 bodies were found inside. 2 were children. The town gathered in the square, smoke rising behind them, snow turning grey with ash. Elias stood before them, exhausted. "This isn't the end," he said, "but it will be if we turn on each other. We have to hold the line, protect what we still know, hold on to the names." A murmur spread. Fear, but also agreement. For now. The children were moved to the schoolhouse. Ruth insisted they be kept together under observation. Parents reluctantly agreed. They didn't speak, they didn't eat, but they watched, all of them, eyes following movement, heads turning in perfect sync, no instruction, no signal. Elias visited at midnight. One child rose as he entered, no smile, just recognition of presence. He knelt. "Do you remember who you are?" he asked. The boy slowly shook his head. "But do you remember me?" The boy opened his mouth. No sound. Then, barely a whisper, "It's underneath." Elias leaned closer. "What is?" "The circle. It's underneath." "Under what?" The boy raised his hand, pointed to the floor. "If you've come this far, hit subscribe now." What lies beneath St. Anselm may not be history. It may still be alive. Elias called Ruth. They pried up the floorboards of the schoolhouse the next morning. Beneath the boards, they found stone, flat, smooth, engraved, the mark, the circle with the X, but larger, carved deep into the foundation, old, older than the building itself, older than the town. Ruth traced it with her fingers, voice hollow. They built on it. They always do, Elias said. As they stood there, the lantern flickered, and every child in the room turned to face the same wall, in unison. The sky changed first. Around midnight, the storm clouds thinned, not clearing but stretching into strange patterns as if pulled from beneath. The snow stopped falling, and in its place a low vibration filled the air, subtle, subsonic, felt more than heard. Then the lights came, faint at first, pale green pulses above the trees, then brighter, like northern lights, twisted into narrow spirals, dropping lower than they ever should. They hovered over the town like watching eyes. Elias stood outside the station, staring up, breath frozen in his chest. The ground beneath his boots hummed. Across the street, dogs howled. Birds flew into the night, confused. The few who still slept woke sweating, dreams shattered by something they couldn't name. And in the schoolhouse the children stood from their cots, silently, together. They walked to the window and looked toward the lights, not afraid, expectant. At the chapel ruins, stone cracked in the frost. Roots buckled beneath the graves. The names that never were began to rise, not as sound, but as pressure, pressing outward, seeping into the night. Ruth ran through the snow toward Elias. "They're not just watching," she shouted. "They're awakening." He didn't ask how she knew, because he felt it too. If the storm has your heart racing, subscribe now. The sky is no longer just sky, and St. Anselm has never been alone. The town's power failed. Every bulb blinked once, then died. Heaters hissed and went cold. Generators coughed and fell silent. The hum intensified. Something was climbing out of the quiet. At the schoolhouse, Elias and Ruth entered cautiously. Children turned toward them as one. faces blank, eyes wide. No recognition. Elias spoke their names. No response. He stepped forward, heart pounding. "Who are you?" A single voice answered, not from any child's lips, but from all of them. "We are what remains." Ruth froze. Her hand gripped Elias's arm. He whispered, "What do you want?" "To be remembered." The lantern flickered violently. The children raised their hands in unison and pointed to the floor again. Ruth pulled Elias aside. "They're not just being taken," she said. "They're vessels." "For what?" "For everything that was erased." Elias stared at the stone beneath the floor. "We need to stop it." "We can't stop what we don't understand," Ruth said, "but maybe we can contain it." Elias turned back to the children. "Who remembers you?" "All who forget themselves." A pulse rippled through the room. The windows cracked. The school bell rang. No one had touched the rope. Outside the wind had returned, but it didn't howl. It whispered. 1,000 voices, speaking names not heard in generations. Some were human, some were not. The hum broke just after dawn, not with a bang or scream, but with a single word, spoken softly, from a mouth that hadn't formed a sentence in days. "Anwell." No one knew what it meant. The child who said it, Lila Kinney, sat in the corner of the schoolhouse, knees drawn to her chest. Her voice was hoarse, her eyes wet. Ruth leaned down gently. "Lila, say it again." The girl shook her head. "I can't." "Why not?" "If I do, it'll find me." She didn't speak again. But something had changed. The pressure in the air lifted. The lights in the sky faded. The children stopped humming. They didn't return to normal, but they stopped moving in unison. Elias took it as a sign. That night the storm returned with fury. Winds screamed down from the hills like a thing alive. Trees snapped. Roofs tore loose. Snow moved sideways, and something else moved with it. Houses disappeared, not collapsed, not buried, gone. A row of them, 5, vanished into the white, leaving only footprints and smoke. No walls, no glass, no signs of violence, just emptiness. Elias stood before the place where the Thompsons' house once stood and stared into nothing. "They're not taking people," he whispered. "They're taking what holds them. Names, homes, places, memory." He ran back to the schoolhouse and found Ruth in the basement with the journal of Elam Reeve. "The first word always breaks the silence," she said. "After that, it spreads. What do we do? Give it what it wants." "And what's that?" "To be named." Elias thought back to the drawings. The symbols, the graves, they had all been marks of erasure, of prevention, seals to keep names buried. But now it wanted the opposite, recognition. "If we name it, we bind it," Ruth said. "That's what the old stories say. Names are power. And if we get it wrong, then it becomes part of us. The moment has come. Subscribe now. What was buried is rising, and only the right word can stop it from swallowing everything." Elias left the schoolhouse just before midnight, snow biting at his eyes. He walked to the old well behind the burned bakery, a place children once played, now long forgotten. He had remembered something. Henry once carved a word into the stone there, nonsense at the time, now maybe not. He found it under the moss. Sethir. It wasn't a word in any language he knew, but when he whispered it aloud, the wind dropped. The silence returned. Then from the forest a howl. Not wolf, not man. Something between. The children woke all at once, gasping. Some cried, some screamed. Others spoke names not theirs, and one, the youngest, Maeve, sat up and said clearly, "You said its name." Elias turned to Ruth. "It heard me." She nodded slowly. "Now we find out if it remembers." The next morning, Ruth found the truth in the church archives. Buried beneath registers and faded hymnals was a leather-bound ledger, unmarked, forgotten. Inside, scrawled in rushed, terrified handwriting, was the testimony of Father Elias Kincaid, 1873. It began with a massacre. Settlers had pushed west. Land was taken, not negotiated. A tribe, never named, was slaughtered after resisting. The men who carried out the killing swore never to speak the name of the people they'd destroyed. They cursed themselves, Kincaid wrote. By erasing the name, they made it eternal. Ruth turned the page. They were never buried with honor. The children were never named aloud again. The bones beneath us remember what we deny. She brought it to Elias. He read in silence. They erased a people, he said, and the silence came for their children first. Their names were taken, and now it takes others. Elias stared out the window. It's not punishing us, it's echoing. History doesn't just haunt, it returns. Subscribe now, because what Elias is about to uncover may rewrite everything they thought was forgotten. That afternoon, Elias visited the Larimores, the oldest family in St. Anselm, descendants of the original town founders. Their house stood untouched by snow, a peculiar stillness clinging to its frame. He asked direct questions. They gave indirect answers. Then he said the name aloud, Sether. The room fell quiet. Mrs. Larimore dropped her tea. You heard it, she said softly. You said it. Elias stepped closer. What was it? A guardian, a vessel, a name buried to bury the guilt. Buried by your family? She didn't answer, but her silence was admission. They built over the graves, Elias said, raised churches on their bones, schools, roads. They thought if the name vanished, the story would too. But it didn't. It waited. Elias left with a name and a mission, not vengeance, not justice, restoration. Back at the station, he spread out the old maps, the journal of Elam Reeve, the ledger of Father Kincaid. Every place the silence had struck aligned with sites of mass erasure, towns founded on bones, lands taken without witness. And every time, the pattern returned. The children, the forgetting, the storm. It wasn't random. It was ritual. At dusk, Ruth entered with more news. The children had begun whispering again, fragments of speech, broken syllables, names, but none their own. One boy repeated Tharlan again and again, until blood leaked from his nose. Another murmured Oshka in his sleep. And one girl, youngest of all, began drawing faces she'd never seen, indigenous, ancient, full of grief. They're remembering for the dead, Ruth said. They're carrying the names that were lost. And it's tearing them apart. Elias rose. Then it's time to return them. At dawn, Elias walked into the woods. He carried no weapon, only a lantern, the old journal, and a list. On that list were names, names spoken by children in fevered sleep, names found in margins, names that no one in St. Anselm had ever heard before. He walked until he reached the valley. The chapel ruins waited. Snow clung to the stones, but the circle was still there, etched beneath it all, pulsing faintly like breath beneath skin. He knelt and laid the list on the ground. Then, with a piece of charcoal, he wrote every name into the snow. Slowly, carefully, one by one. Tharlan, Oshka, Virel, Amura. 43 names. He said each aloud. His voice cracked halfway through, throat raw from cold and grief. But he didn't stop. When the last name passed his lips, the air shifted. The cold softened. Then came the wind, not violent, but warm, gentle, like breath from below. Behind him, a sound. Footsteps. He turned. The children were there, all of them, barefoot in the snow, silent, awake. They stood in a ring around the circle, watching. Elias met Ruth's eyes. She had followed without a word, notebook clutched to her chest, tears on her face. It's working, she whispered. They're listening. Then the children collapsed, one by one, falling not like puppets cut from strings, but like candles snuffed out mid-prayer. Elias rushed to them. They breathed, they shivered, they stirred. One opened his eyes and wept. Another whispered, "It's over." Ruth dropped to her knees beside them, checking pulses, calling names. This time they answered. The silence has broken, but the reckoning leaves a scar. Subscribe now. The truth beneath St. Anselm has been uncovered. But peace comes at a cost. High above, the lights faded. The sky returned to black. The snow, once angry and endless, now drifted gently, indifferent, as if it too had finished mourning. Back in town, Elias rang the church bell. It echoed without resistance, a sound not heard in days. People emerged slowly, faces cautious, eyes wide with disbelief. They found their children in the church, wrapped in blankets, speaking softly to one another. Some cried, some laughed. One girl sang an old hymn no one had taught her. By nightfall, families reunited. The storm lifted, but St. Anselm would never be the same. Elias returned to the chapel one last time, just before midnight. He stood at the edge of the valley, looking at the names he'd written. Most had already faded, but one remained, Sether. He drew a final line through it, then walked away, and never said it again. Spring arrived late. The thaw came in slow breaths, melting the snow inch by inch, revealing what had survived and what hadn't. St. Anselm remained standing, scarred, smaller, quieter, but standing. The children, though changed, returned to something like normal. They spoke again, played again, but they were older now in a way beyond years. When asked about the lost days, they remembered little, only fragments, a song, a face, a name they couldn't quite pronounce. Some parents chose not to ask, others tried, gently, but found only silence. Ruth continued her work, documenting everything. She sent reports to universities, none of which replied. She mailed a parcel to a folklore institute in New York. Months passed with no answer. Elias didn't return to the valley. He knew better now. Some places didn't want company. The church was rebuilt, the school repainted, the bakery reopened under new hands. But 5 houses were never touched. Their lots remained bare, the soil beneath them oddly soft as if still breathing. The town stopped speaking certain names, and no child was named after the lost again. If this story has stayed with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. These forgotten echoes deserve to be heard and remembered. Elias visited the graves weekly, not with flowers, but with presence. He read the list again each time, not aloud, only to himself, because remembering didn't always mean speaking. One day Ruth joined him. She stood in silence, then asked, "Do you think it's really over?" Elias looked to the hills. Snow still lined the edges, stubborn in the shade. "No," he said, "but I think it's sleeping." Ruth nodded. "And if it wakes again?" "Then someone will have to remember, even if it hurts." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then it won't be forgotten." That night, Elias wrote one final entry in his notebook. He didn't write a name, just one line. "We are what we remember." He closed the book, placed it on the shelf, and turned out the light. But far away, in another small town no one spoke of anymore, a child woke from sleep, whispering a name their parents didn't recognize, because the silence never really ends. It only waits and listens. Thank you for watching. If you felt the chill of St. Anselm, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, and click on the video on screen to uncover another mystery buried in time. The past isn't done with us yet.